Have you ever noticed that the person who barely passed high school is now driving a Tesla while your valedictorian friend is still complaining about student loan payments? Yeah, me too. And honestly, it used to drive me absolutely crazy. I mean, where's the justice in that? Um, shouldn't the smartest people automatically end up with the most money? Well, turns out the universe has a twisted sense of humor, and intelligence doesn't work the way we think it does when it comes to building wealth. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about why some people get rich while others stay broke. And today, I'm going to share something that might completely change how you think about success. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to admit: being smart might actually be holding you back financially. I know that sounds ridiculous, but stick with me here because the research on this is absolutely mind blowing. Before we dive into this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if you want to learn more about building wealth, even if you're not the sharpest tool in the shed. Trust me, by the end of this video, you might actually be grateful you're not a genius. So, let's start with some data that'll make your head spin. Swedish researchers followed nearly 60,000 men who took intelligence tests when they joined the military. These weren't just random guys either. This was a massive study tracking their earnings over 11 years using actual government wage records. No guessing, no surveys, just cold hard facts about who made what. And here's where it gets interesting. At first, everything looked exactly like you'd expect. Uh, Higher intelligence scores meant higher paychecks. Uh, Smart guys made more money than average guys, who made more money than below average guys. The world made sense, again, and all was right with the universe. But then something weird happened around the $55,000 mark. Once people hit that income level, the connection between being smart and making money started to fall apart. And get this, the top 1% of earners actually scored slightly lower on intelligence tests than their peers. Let me repeat that because it's important. The richest people weren't the smartest people. In fact, they were a little bit dumber. Now, before you start celebrating your mediocre test scores, let me be clear. These ultra-wealthy individuals aren't actually stupid. They're still highly capable people. But the study shows us something fascinating. Once you get past a certain level of success, raw intelligence stops being the deciding factor. Other traits start to matter more. And these are often the exact same traits that people with average intelligence have been relying on their entire lives. Which brings us to our first reason why supposedly dumb people sometimes build wealth faster than the rest of us. They have what psychologists call stupid grit. And yes, that's a real term, not something I made up to make myself feel better about my own questionable life choices. Caroline Miller, who studied this extensively, defined stupid grit as pursuing goals at all costs, even when it might hurt you or others. Think about those people who climb Mount Everest. When they're near the summit, they're exhausted, running out of oxygen, and facing serious danger. The smart thing to do would obviously be to turn around and head back to safety. But instead, many climbers push forward with what they call summit fever, sometimes with deadly consequences. Now, Miller contrasts this with authentic grit, which is the passion and perseverance to pursue long-term goals in a sustainable way. And obviously, authentic grit is what we should all aim for. But here's the thing that most of us don't want to admit. We give up way too easily. That's where a little bit of stupid grit can actually save us. Think about investing for a minute. When I first started putting money into the stock market, I was investing tiny amounts. We're talking a few hundred here and there. It felt completely meaningless. The numbers barely moved, and I kept asking myself if this was even worth the effort. I came close to quitting more times than I cared to admit. But then something clicked when I actually sat down and did the math. Those tiny investments, if you keep making them consistently and give them time to compound, turn into something absolutely massive. The early years feel painfully slow because you're watching paint dry. But the growth is exponential, and most people never stick around long enough to see it. And this is where not overthinking becomes a strange advantage. Smart people tend to analyze their early results, convince themselves the strategy isn't working, and switch to something else way too quickly. Meanwhile, people with stupid grit just keep plugging away, and that persistence eventually pays off in a huge way. In real life, This might look like applying to the same company over and over again until someone finally gives you a chance, or continuing to dollar cost average into index funds, even when every financial news headline is screaming that the market is about to crash. Maybe it's volunteering for the boring, thankless projects at work until leadership can't ignore your contributions anymore. Look, authentic grit should absolutely be the goal, but when the stakes aren't life or death, sometimes a little stupid grit is exactly what carries you across the finish line while everyone else is still standing at the starting blocks analyzing their strategy. The second reason average people often outperform geniuses financially is that they jump headfirst into opportunities without getting paralyzed by analysis. I learned this lesson the hard way through a friend of mine who definitely wasn't what you'd call book smart. This guy struggled through high school, um, had an average college experience, and bounced between steady but unremarkable jobs for years. Then one day, completely out of nowhere, he told me he was quitting his job to start a lawn care business. Not landscaping, not some fancy outdoor design company, just basic lawn care, mowing grass, trimming hedges, the works. I remember thinking he'd lost his mind. He didn't have a business plan, barely had any savings, and had zero experience running a company. But here's what he did have that I didn't. He had the ability to act without overthinking every possible scenario. While I was still researching the best business, registration websites, and comparing liability insurance policies, he was already out there cutting grass and making money. 6 months later, he had more clients than he could handle and was hiring employees. Meanwhile, I spent 2 years planning a side business that I never actually started because I was too busy making sure everything was perfect. I had spreadsheets, market analysis, competitive research, and a detailed 5 year projection. What I didn't have was a single paying customer because I was still in the planning phase while he was actually executing. This pattern happens everywhere, and it's honestly a little infuriating if you think about it too much. Smart people get stuck in what I call analysis paralysis. They want to research every angle, understand every risk, and have a perfect plan before they make a move. Which sounds logical, right? But while they're busy creating the perfect strategy, less intelligent people are already out there making mistakes, learning from them, and building something real. Now, I'm not saying you should make reckless decisions or ignore obvious red flags, but there's a huge difference between being cautious and being paralyzed by the need for certainty. The truth is, you'll never have all the information you think you need. At some point, you just have to take the leap and figure it out as you go. The third reason people with average intelligence often build wealth faster is something that might surprise you. They lean heavily on emotional intelligence, and it turns out that matters way more than we give it credit for. There's actually research on this that'll blow your mind. One study found that when it comes to business success, raw intelligence only accounts for about 10% of the outcome, but emotional intelligence, that explains somewhere between 85 and 90% of success. Let me put that in perspective for you. Being book smart might give you a slight edge, but your ability to understand people, manage your own emotions, and build genuine relationships is almost everything. And here's the kicker: people with average intelligence often develop these skills out of necessity because they can't rely on being the smartest person in the room. So, what does emotional intelligence actually look like in the real world? It's having the self awareness to recognize when you're in over your head and asking for help instead of pretending you know everything. It's staying calm when markets are crashing and everyone around you is panicking. Like it's having the motivation to keep investing and building when you don't see immediate results. And it's developing the empathy to truly understand what your customers, clients, or business partners actually need. I used to think networking was just smoozing and small talk. Which honestly made me want to hide in a corner at every business event. But I realized pretty quickly that no matter how much knowledge I had about finance or investing, it wouldn't matter if I couldn't connect with people and communicate those ideas effectively. Emotional intelligence is what gets you invited to opportunities you didn't even know existed. It's meeting a future business partner at a random coffee shop conversation. It's landing a better job because the interviewer felt a genuine connection with you. It's convincing investors to bet on your idea because they trust you as a person, not just your business plan. The smartest people often struggle with this because they assume their intelligence speaks for itself. They think if they just present the facts logically, everyone will obviously see their point of view. But that's not how humans work. We make decisions based on emotions and then justify them with logic. If you can't connect emotionally, your brilliant ideas will fall on deaf ears. Our fourth reason gets to the heart of why intelligence can actually become a liability. Smart people are absolutely terrified of looking stupid, while average people have nothing to lose. Think about it. If you've been labeled as gifted or intelligent your whole life, your entire identity becomes wrapped up in being smart. Making a mistake, or taking a risk that fails doesn't just hurt your bank account. It feels like proof that you're not as brilliant as everyone thinks you are. That fear of embarrassment can be paralyzing. You'll avoid taking chances because what if people find out you don't know everything? What if your big idea flops and everyone realizes you're not actually a genius? This creates a prison of perfectionism where you'd rather do nothing than risk being wrong. Meanwhile, people who were never praised for their intelligence growing up don't have this burden. Maybe they were called hardworking, kind, or persistent. Or maybe they were even teased for not being the sharpest knife in the drawer. But here's Snorts, the beautiful irony. Since their self-worth was never tied to being smart, they have absolutely nothing to prove and everything to gain. This is where what I call the let them mentality becomes incredibly powerful. Instead of worrying about what others might think, you simply let them think whatever they want. Let them think you're making a dumb decision. Let them laugh at your business idea. Let them doubt your investment strategy. While you're focused on letting them think whatever they want, you're free to actually pursue the opportunities they're too worried about appearances to even consider. Remember the pet rock craze from the 70s? Like Gary Dahl came up with this idea almost as a joke while complaining about how much work real pets required? He thought it would be hilarious to sell rocks as pets, complete with care instructions and everything. Most people would have been too embarrassed to actually follow through with something so ridiculous. But Dahl didn't care about looking sophisticated or intelligent. He leaned into the absurdity, marketed these rocks as actual pets, and even included training manuals. What seemed the dumbest idea in the world ended up selling over 1.5 million pet rocks in just 6 months, making him a millionaire practically overnight. Then there's Steve Gadlin, who started a website called I Want to Draw a Cat for You. His entire business model was drawing cats for people in whatever style they requested and emailing them the results for $10 each. On paper, this sounds absolutely ridiculous. Who would pay for hand-drawn cat pictures from a random guy on the internet? Well, it turns out about 19,000 people would. Over 3 years, Gadlin made over $300,000 from his cat drawings and related merchandise. His supposedly stupid idea even caught the attention of Mark Cuban, who invested in the business on Shark Tank. The pattern here is obvious once you see it. While smart people are worried about maintaining their reputation and looking sophisticated, regular folks are out there testing weird ideas and discovering what actually works. They're not paralyzed by the fear of looking foolish because they never expected to look brilliant in the first place. This connects directly to our fifth and final reason why average people often outperform geniuses financially. They're not obsessed with prestige, and that saves them an enormous amount of money. Smart people love prestigious things, elite universities, impressive job titles, luxury brands that signal their intelligence and success. But here's the problem with chasing prestige. It's incredibly expensive and usually provides terrible return on investment. Take higher education, for example. The average annual tuition at an Ivy League school is approaching $7,000. Meanwhile, you can get a solid education at a state university or community college for around $10 to $15,000 per year. That's a difference of $50 to $60,000 annually that could be invested, used to start a business, or put toward buying real estate. Now imagine you're 18 years old and deciding between Harvard and your local state school. The smart kid chooses Harvard because of the prestige and spends the next 4 years accumulating massive debt for a degree that might not actually provide better career outcomes. The average kid chooses the state school, graduates with minimal debt, and invests that extra money into index funds or uses it to start a small business. Fast forward 20 years, and who do you think is in better financial shape? The Harvard graduate who's still paying off student loans, or the state school graduate who's been building wealth since graduation? The math isn't even close when you factor in compound interest and the opportunity cost of that debt. This same pattern plays out everywhere you look. I know a guy who dropped out of college to become a plumber. Not exactly the career path that gets you invited to fancy cocktail parties, right? But while his engineering classmates were graduating with $60,000 in student debt and fighting over entry-level positions that barely paid enough to cover their loan payments, he was already earning solid money and building a client base. 10 years later, this guy owns 3 plumbing trucks, employs a handful of people, and makes more in a month than most of those engineers make in a year. He's not worried about impressing anyone with his job title. He's too busy depositing checks and planning his next vacation to care what people think about his profession. The smart people, meanwhile, are still climbing the corporate ladder, hoping that their next promotion will finally give them the respect and salary they think they deserve. They're playing a completely different game, one where looking important matters more than actually building wealth. And this is the crucial difference. Average people focus on what works. They pick careers based on demand and earning potential, not on what sounds impressive at their high school reunion. They buy reliable used cars instead of luxury vehicles they can't afford. They invest in boring index funds instead of trying to pick the next hot stock that'll make them look like a financial genius. Smart people, on the other hand, often get trapped by their own expectations. They feel like they should be driving a BMW because they went to a good school. They think they deserve a corner office because they have an advanced degree. They believe their intelligence entitles them to a certain lifestyle, even if their bank account can't support it. Here's what's really wild about all this. The traits that make people successful financially aren't complicated or mysterious. You don't need a PhD to understand them. Persistence, emotional intelligence, willingness to take risks, and focus on results over appearances. These are things that literally anyone can develop. But here's the catch. If you've been told your whole life that you're smart, it can actually be harder to develop these traits. You might think you don't need them because your intelligence should be enough, or you might be so afraid of looking foolish that you never give yourself the chance to practice and improve. This is why some of the most successful entrepreneurs I know are people who struggled in school. They had to learn how to connect with people because they couldn't rely on being the smartest person in the room. They had to develop persistence because things didn't come easily to them. They had to take risks because playing it safe wasn't getting them anywhere. And once they developed these skills, their so-called lack of intelligence became irrelevant. In fact, it became an advantage because they weren't weighed down by the expectations and fears that hold back supposedly smarter people. Look, I'm not saying intelligence is worthless. Obviously, you need a basic level of competence to succeed in most fields. But the research is pretty clear that once you hit that threshold, other factors become way more important. And those factors have nothing to do with how well you performed on standardized tests or what your GPA was in college. The beautiful thing about this is that it means financial success is available to pretty much everyone, regardless of where they fall on the intelligence spectrum. You don't need to be born with a genius level IQ. You don't need to attend elite schools or impress people with your brilliance. You just need to develop the right habits and mindset. Start taking action instead of endlessly researching and planning. Focus on building relationships and understanding people, not just accumulating knowledge. Don't be afraid to look stupid if it means you might learn something valuable. Choose opportunities based on their potential returns, not on how impressive they'll make you sound at parties. So, there you have it. The uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to admit is that being smart might actually be working against you financially. While geniuses are busy overthinking and protecting their reputation, regular folks are out there building wealth through persistence, action, and good old-fashioned people skills. Maybe it's time to embrace being average and start getting rich.